you couldn't wish for sort of worse news, if you like, on the economy if you tried. Labour have come up with this response to it. I suppose they're hoping that we're all going to sort of bury this economic bad news in I don't know, an overdose of turkey, Christmas pudding and festive cheer.
I think that's very much the hope of it, and I understand later today we're expecting Keir Starmer's Christmas message, and I suspect that is a message that's going to dwell less on the current economic circumstances and very much be more a message of looking to the future and hope and change in the future, because right now things are really not looking good for the UK economy and the UK PLC.
Now, let's just have a look at some of those things. So, the state of Britain's stalling economy is disappointing, according to a Labour cabinet minister. Leading business groups said the country's fiscal outlook was headed for the worst of all worlds, and that's from the CBI. So the CBI, look, they've had their own issues, fair enough. But what I don't understand is that Rachel Reeves has said that she was going to grow the economy, and arguably, given the numbers, she's crashed it. Liz Truss was hounded out of office for doing that, and frankly, she didn't do such a bad job in comparison to Rachel, did she?
Well, I think these are very different circumstances and how much you can kind of blame the Chancellor for the decisions they've made. But I will say certainly that they've made a huge amount of their kind of credentialism. They've said that we're going to do things very differently. We're going to have a premium stability premium. And actually, it turns out it doesn't look so much as stability as more like stagnation. So I think that what did for Liz Truss was the sudden speed of it. With this Labour government currently, it looks more like a much more drawn out, prolonged and protracted affair.
How long have Labour got before the restlessness sets in, either within their party or indeed the nation? I mean, we've already seen the polls, which have seen, 19 points taken off Labour's popularity, putting him now on a par with Jeremy Corbyn at his low point. But how much longer can we have that? I mean, if we have 6 further months of bad news, I'm assuming at that point somebody will say, look, this just isn't working.
I mean, I think we've already got some restlessness. Let's not forget that, of course, that it was within 100 days that Number 10 got rid of its chief of staff. That was a reflection, I think, of the early blues of this government. I think that it's now stabilised a little better. But as you say, James, if things aren't turning around in 12 months, that's going to be an issue. Not least, of course, because at that point, I think that it's much harder for Labour ministers to keep saying, oh, we had a terrible inheritance. Well, I think that worked in the early days, but the further we get away from July the 4th, and the more and more which businesses keep saying, no, we're making these investment decisions because of your rhetoric, your policies, your tax changes, then it's going to get much harder for the government, not least, of course, because growth was supposedly the number one mission of Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer. And if they're not getting that by the end of next year, you wait to think, how is it going to turn around in the medium to long term?
Now, let's talk a little bit about the Conservatives, because, frankly, they're not faring much better. Kemi Badenoch, of course, is the new leader. The only thing she managed to get any attention for this week was visiting Jeremy Clarkson on his farm. She seems to think that having policy isn't very important, and just coming up with almost university-led sound bites is going to lead her to number 10. Is she as delusional as Keir Starmer?
Well, I think that the optimist case for Kemi Badenoch, shall we say, is that, Labour signed up to a whole bunch of stuff which is now coming back to haunt them, such as the pledge for waspy women. Kemi Badenoch is now keen to try and avoid those pitfalls by saying, look, we're going to have a discussion around principles first, and then we'll get to policies. The danger is, though, James, as you say, you lose the first impression, that all-important first impression to define yourself. And second of all, are they just going to get overlooked in favour of reform, who seem to have all the best tunes at the moment? So I do think there's a lot of Conservatives right now who are saying we do need a bit of policy and we need to come up with it before those May local elections.
Let's talk a little bit about the United States of America. We can't ignore the fact that they're going to have a new president taking office in the new year. It's quite interesting, some breaking news for you. Matt Gaetz, who was briefly Donald Trump's nominee for US Attorney General, who paid women for sex, including a 17-year-old girl, used drugs whilst he was a member of Congress, according to a committee. The House Ethics Committee's report concluded there was substantial evidence that the former Florida congressman violated House rules, state and federal laws, and other standards of conduct, banning prostitution, statutory rape, illegal drug use and obstruction of Congress. It doesn't say much for Donald Trump's judgment, does it?
I think that it once again shows that Donald Trump has a fairly eclectic range of people within his circle. Matt Gaetz, of course, as you say, was one of the most controversial ones. And there was even MAGA Republicans saying he wasn't going to get past the Senate confirmation floor. And yet, of course, that's also part of the same proposed cabinet as Marco Rubio, who is very much within the Western Atlanticist tradition, very mainstream conservative figure relatively in the Republican circles right now. So again, as you say, James, I mean, Donald Trump's judgment has been, shall we say, all over the place at times. And I think on this one occasion, it was clearly the most outlandish pick. It was clearly a pick that was never going to get past Republicans, let alone Democrats. And I think that it's no surprise now that he won't be in charge of the Department of Justice, given all the allegations that have been levelled against him over the past 3 years.
And what do you make of this report that Lord Mandelson, who famously has made some somewhat negative comments about the incoming president, but anyway, US envoy as he will be, set to work with Nigel Farage to win over Trump? Really?
I mean, I'll believe it when I see it in terms of how much this cooperation is actually going to take the form of, working together. These comments that Lord Mandelson made were back in November, the comments about working with Farage, and he said, well, whoever got it would have to work with people in Trump's orbit. Farage is very keen to present himself as that. I think it's worth looking at how Farage has always said that he wanted to work within the national interest. This was something he said far back as 2016 when Trump got first elected. We'll await to see how it actually manifests itself, but I think that although there's been some kind words between Nigel and Peter Mandelson, I very much doubt it's going to be a kind of formal role that perhaps Farage would like it to be.
So Nigel Farage, of course, leader of Reform, they've seen a resurgence and perhaps a surge in their popularity since Labour were elected. Are they going to become the main opposition, do you think? Do you think that that 2025 is the year in which we see Reform continue with that popularity? And I don't know, do you think that Nigel Farage will play a greater part in that politics?
I think increasingly we're seeing signs that Reform are a part of a permanent feature of British politics rather than a temporary blip. And I think that we will see them entrenched in part of the country come May when they have those local elections. They're expected to win hundreds of councillors there, a precursor to 2026 when they may well overtake the Conservatives in both the Welsh and Scottish parliaments. So I think that they are on course to upset British politics in a way that the Liberals and SDP tried in the 80s. 100 years ago, the Labour Party did to the Liberals of Asquith and Lloyd George. So it's a really big generational shift. It's too soon to tell, frankly, what impact there'll be. We've only 1 year into this 5-year parliament. A lot can change. You cast your mind back 12 months, and obviously it was Richard Tice leading Reform, who were about on 10, 11%. Now they've doubled that in a year. Could it go up in another year? I'm sceptical it'll see the same growth, but on current trends, they certainly look like a formidable force to be reckoned with.
Meanwhile, the right to vote for 16 and 17-year-olds could be included in an elections bill next year, according to the Commons leader. I mean, this would have a major impact, and presumably Labour's got to get votes from wherever they can. The younger vote is perhaps more likely, given that they've managed to upset WASPy women and anybody on a pension.
Yes, I think that there could be some interesting different upsets because of this, though. You've got to remember that in the last century, every single time the franchise was expanded, the electorate then, who was given the vote, chose to vote against the incumbent party at the time. So, for instance, when 18 to 21-year-olds were given the vote by Harold Wilson's government in the late 1960s, subsequently that cohort voted to elect them out in 1970. So I think sometimes it's a little bit of a misnomer sometimes to always say, well, these people will therefore vote for X or Y. Gratitude is a very limited currency in politics, and Reform are certainly being very bullish about their chances with these 16 to 18-year-olds. We're going to see a test case of that, as I say, in the Senate elections next year in 2026, in 18 months' time, because they think they're very good on TikTok and Gen Z and how those voters will go down. As you say, though, James, I mean, Labour seem to be alienating voters everywhere. I'm not sure there'll be sort of many thousands or millions of 16 to 18-year-olds going out there to vote Labour enthusiastically. So I'll wait to see if it actually gets through the line, but given how many times 16 to 18-year-old votes have failed before.
I'm going to be very interested also to hear how the younger generation vote, and there is some discussion that indeed Reform, because of their social media policies, are extremely popular with the younger lot, as opposed to the Conservatives, who seem to be utterly out of touch. And I'm also pleased to hear that you refer to them as Gen Z as well. There are those who seem to take the American pronunciation, which I don't think that should be allowed. Just finally to you, quick question. Stephen Cotterill, so Archbishop of York, he's under pressure. He might be stepping in for the outgoing Archbishop of Canterbury, but there are calls for him to resign because of how he handled various different cases. The more information that seems to be published on this, the least likely it is that he's going to stay in post. A huge amount of pressure on Stephen Cotterill. From the evidence I've seen, I think he should step down. If it was a normal workplace, he would go. Can he really stay in that position of Archbishop of York?
I think that there's a large number of clergymen who will be meeting their flock this Christmas and discussing this very issue in some capacity. I think what's actually keeping him partly in the role at the moment is the fact that the Archbishop of Canterbury, the one man senior to him in the hierarchy of the Church of England, had to go. If a second one had to go, the most senior ranking member, when Welby steps down next month, I mean, that really would plunge the Church of England into an absolute open crisis. So I think more revelations will come out over the Christmas period. It's a period when a lot of people are thinking about their local church and what it means for the future of the country. And I think it's about 50-50 whether he stays or whether he goes.
OK, just finally to you before I let you go, James, as we look into 2025, what are the, I don't know, unusual things that we should perhaps be looking out for, or the things that you're thinking that you might be writing about in the next 12 months?
I think that it's going to obviously be America's the main story, I think, in terms of tariffs and what that means, the unpredictability of having Donald Trump, who seems to take Nixon's theory of the madman foreign policy to new levels. In terms of interesting on different things, I think it's just going to be increasing curveballs, things to do with energy prices and the economy will have lots of upsets and shocks. And given the way the last 12 months have gone, I think that anyone who can say what the definitive story will be here right now is going to be with the egg on their face. So I wait to see with great interest, but I suspect there'll be lots to write about, wherever form it comes.
I suspect you might be right. James Heale, political correspondent at The Spectator. Thank you.